He didn't kill for revenge. He didn't kill to protect anyone. And he didn't even know the man he murdered. When police asked why, he gave them 3 words that stunned even hardened detectives. "I did it for fun." The victim was a 71-year-old registered sex offender, a man many would say deserved punishment. But what happens when the person delivering that punishment admits he enjoyed it? Is this justice? Or is this just another monster hiding behind morality? Tonight, we explore the chilling case of Varun Suresh and the psychology of killing for fun. When police walked into the small California neighborhood that day, they were expecting to find another routine crime scene. A stabbing, a shooting, maybe a domestic dispute. But what they uncovered was something so bizarre, so unnerving, that even seasoned detectives found themselves at a loss for words. The suspect wasn't trembling. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even trying to cover up what he had done. Instead, he was calm, matter of fact, almost detached. And when asked the most important question, why, he gave an answer that instantly shifted this case from a simple homicide into something that forces us to rethink human psychology itself. He said, "I did it for fun." That one sentence sent shockwaves across the community. Because it wasn't just about the act of murder. It was about motive. And motive is what separates a crime of passion from a cold-blooded execution. It's what divides a man driven by revenge from a man driven by something darker: pleasure. Now let's pause here. The victim in this case was not just any man. He was a 71-year-old registered sex offender. And in society, few groups are as hated, as despised, as reviled as those on the sex offender registry. For many, hearing that a man like this had been killed sparked a strange feeling of relief. Almost a sense of justice. But here's the problem. When someone says they killed not out of protection, not out of revenge, but for fun, it forces us to ask the hardest question of all. Is this justice? Or is this just another form of evil? Tonight, we're going to dive into the story of Varun Suresh, the man behind this shocking crime. We'll break down the case itself, explore the chilling psychology of vigilantes, and confront the ethics of killing bad people outside the law. But more importantly, we'll try to understand what it means when someone confesses that murder itself is a source of entertainment. Why this story matters. Why should you care about this case? Because it reveals the darkest side of human morality. Think about it. On the surface, we love vigilantes in movies and TV shows. We cheer for Batman when he breaks a criminal's jaw. We idolize Dexter when he hunts down killers that escape the law. We've all had those moments when we said, if the system can't punish them, someone should. But in the real world, vigilantes are not clean-cut heroes. They're human beings, flawed, complex, and sometimes terrifyingly dangerous. The case of Varun Suresh is different from most vigilante stories. Because in his own words, he didn't do it for justice. He didn't do it to save someone. He didn't even know the victim personally. He said he did it for fun, and that makes this story one of the clearest windows into the psychology of a thrill killer hiding behind the mask of morality. Setting the scene. Imagine a quiet California street. The kind of place where people water their lawns, walk their dogs, and wave politely to their neighbors. But behind the curtains of one of these homes lived a man with a criminal past, a convicted sex offender. He had served his time. He had registered, as the law requires. But his presence alone was enough to make neighbors uneasy. Enter Varun Suresh, a man in his late 30s, born in India, raised abroad, and living a relatively low-profile life. He wasn't in financial ruin. He wasn't in the middle of a family feud. From the outside, he didn't fit the profile of a killer. But what happened next defied every expectation. Suresh targeted this elderly man. He hunted him down. And after killing him, instead of hiding the crime or making excuses, he looked law enforcement in the eye and admitted everything. And then came that infamous line, "I did it for fun." The shock factor. Journalists covering the case couldn't believe it. Social media exploded. Some people typed comments like, "Good, sex offenders deserve it." Others were horrified. If killing can be justified because the victim was hated, where does it stop? That division between approval and horror is at the very heart of this case. And it's why the Varun Suresh story is more than just a local crime report. It's a story that cuts to the core of our moral beliefs. Because here's the truth: vigilante killings are not new, but they almost always come with a justification. He hurt my family. The police did nothing. Someone had to stop him. But fun? That doesn't sound like justice. That doesn't sound like protection. That sounds like the language of a thrill killer. Why this case fits our dark psychology series. We've covered fathers who murdered their families. We've covered men who lived double lives. We've explored the hidden motives behind crimes that shocked the world. But this case is different. It forces us to examine not only one man's mind, but our own collective psychology. Why do some people cheer when monsters are killed? Why do others recoil, even when the victim is despised? And most chilling of all, what happens when someone discovers they enjoy the act of killing and then disguises it as morality? That's the dark heart of this story. And by the time we're finished, you may find yourself questioning your own feelings about vigilante justice. So who was Varun Suresh? Who was the man he killed? And how did this murder unfold in such a calculated, disturbing way? To answer that, we need to go beyond the headlines. We need to explore the case details themselves, the timeline, the investigation, and the confession that shocked even hardened detectives. Because once we understand what happened, we can begin to understand why. Setting the stage. Every true crime story begins with context. And in this case, it's important to understand who Varun Suresh was, who the victim was, and how the events unfolded step by step. The crime itself might have been brief, a single violent act that lasted only minutes, but the story leading up to it reveals a complex collision of morality, psychology, and choice. So let's rewind the clock. Who was Varun Suresh? Varun Suresh was 37 years old. He was born in India, but had been living in the United States for years. Not much was known publicly about his personal life. No long criminal record, no signs of violent history. On paper, he wasn't the type of man you would expect to suddenly commit a cold-blooded killing. He wasn't described as poor, desperate, or in crisis. He wasn't fueled by revenge over a family member's abuse. He wasn't even someone who had been publicly outspoken against sex offenders. And that's what makes this case so puzzling, because from all appearances, Suresh lived a relatively ordinary life. But beneath that ordinary exterior, there may have been something else brewing. A hidden fascination with control, with punishment, and with violence. The victim, a 71-year-old registered sex offender. The man Suresh killed was 71 years old. His name wasn't widely released. But what was confirmed is that he was a registered sex offender living in California. He had been convicted years earlier of sexual crimes. Crimes that put him on the state registry. Like all offenders in the system, he was required to notify authorities of his address. That meant his information was public. Anyone could look it up. To his neighbors, he was the old man down the street with a dark past. To society, he was someone permanently marked, permanently distrusted. And to Varun Suresh, he was a target. How Suresh found him. Reports suggest that Suresh deliberately looked for a victim. He didn't stumble across this man randomly. Instead, he used the sex offender registry, a public database, to identify someone he thought deserved punishment. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a chance encounter. It was planned. Suresh went searching for someone he believed the world would not miss. And he found him in this 71-year-old man. This tells us something crucial. Suresh framed his choice around morality. By picking a sex offender, he gave himself a built-in justification. But as we'll see, his own confession later revealed that morality was just a mask for something else. The day of the murder. On that September day, Suresh approached the victim. Details vary in reports, but what we know is that he confronted the man and then attacked. The exact method of killing has been described in different ways, but law enforcement confirmed that it was direct and deliberate. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a scuffle that got out of hand. Suresh killed him, and once the act was done, he didn't flee into hiding. He didn't try to dispose of the body. He didn't concoct an elaborate alibi. He waited for police. And when they asked him the question every detective asks, why? He gave them the simplest, yet most disturbing answer of all. I did it for fun. The arrest. Police officers are used to excuses. They're used to lies. Some suspects cry, some deny, some blame others. But Suresh didn't do any of that. He was calm, direct, almost emotionless. He admitted to the killing. He admitted he chose the victim deliberately. He admitted that the victim's status as a sex offender made him the perfect target. But then, with a chilling detachment, he admitted he did it for the thrill, for entertainment, for fun. That single word took this case from being labeled as vigilante justice into the realm of thrill killing. Community reaction. News of the murder spread quickly, and the public reaction was divided, almost down the middle. On one side were those who cheered. To them, Suresh was a hero, a man who took out someone they saw as a predator. Online forums lit up with comments like, "One less monster on the street. Good riddance." But on the other side were those deeply unsettled, because while they despised sex offenders, they also recognized the danger of celebrating vigilante killings. If it was acceptable to kill a man because of his past crimes, where would it stop? Would it be acceptable to kill a thief? A drug dealer? Someone who might commit a crime? That slippery slope terrified many people. And then, of course, there was that phrase again. For fun. That's what unsettled even those who initially wanted to cheer. Because justice isn't supposed to be fun. Killing isn't supposed to be entertainment. Law enforcement's view. For detectives, this wasn't about morality. It was about the law. And the law is clear. Murder is murder. No matter who the victim is, no matter what crimes they may have committed in the past, taking justice into your own hands crosses the line into criminality. And for law enforcement, Suresh's confession sealed the case. They had the body. They had the suspect. They had the admission. There would be no need for a lengthy investigation to prove who did it. The trial, when it comes, will focus not on who or how, but on why. The confession. Let's pause here and reflect on those three words again. For fun. This was not a slip of the tongue. This was not said in a fit of anger. It was calm. It was deliberate. And it tells us everything we need to know about Suresh's state of mind. He wasn't killing because he believed the victim was a threat. He wasn't killing because he wanted to protect others. He wasn't even killing to send a message. He was killing because he enjoyed it. That's what makes this case so chilling. And that's why it stands out among other vigilante stories. Because when we peel back the surface, it doesn't look like justice. It looks like a thrill killer hiding behind the mask of morality. Now that we understand the facts of the case, who Varun Suresh was, who his victim was, and how the crime unfolded, we can begin to dig deeper. Why do people become vigilantes? What drives someone to hunt down another human being, especially when they have no personal connection? And most importantly, What does psychology tell us about the difference between justice and obsession? In the next section, we'll explore the disturbing world of vigilante psychology and why people like Varun Suresh cross the line from moral outrage into murder. The allure of vigilantism. From the dawn of civilization, there have been people who take justice into their own hands. When courts fail, when the law feels weak, or when punishment seems too light, there is always someone who rises up and says, "If the system won't act, I will." The vigilante archetype is as old as storytelling itself. From folklore heroes like Robin Hood, to masked crusaders in comic books, to Hollywood anti-heroes like the Punisher and Dexter Morgan. Society has always been fascinated by the idea of one person who dares to punish the wicked when institutions fall short. On screen, we cheer for them. In books, we root for them. Because deep down, most of us have felt frustration at injustice. We've read headlines about predators walking free, or abusers serving light sentences, and thought to ourselves, "That's not fair." But in the real world, vigilantes are not scripted heroes. They are human beings, and that makes their actions messy, dangerous, and morally complicated. Varun Suresh's case sits squarely in this space. He claimed his victim was a sex offender, a man most people would view as deserving of scorn. But instead of protecting someone or responding to an immediate threat, he hunted the man down and later admitted he did it for fun. So was this about justice, or was it about something else? The psychology of the vigilante mindset. Psychologists who study vigilantism point out that most vigilantes share a few common traits. Moral outrage. They feel deeply angered by what they perceive as injustice. Distrust in authority. They don't believe the police, courts, or system will do enough. Personal empowerment. They feel they must take action themselves. Black and white thinking. They divide the world into good people and bad people. But beneath those layers, there's often something even more personal, a craving for control. Many vigilantes admit that part of the appeal is not just punishing the guilty, but feeling powerful, finally holding the authority that they believe society lacks. In other words, vigilantism often satisfies not just moral anger, but also personal psychological needs. Justice versus obsession. At first glance, vigilantes might appear noble. They strike against abusers, criminals, predators. But the danger is that this moral drive can become obsessive. Instead of acting once to protect others, the vigilante begins to see themselves as a permanent executioner. Every offender becomes a target. Every flaw in the justice system becomes an excuse to kill again. It's here that obsession replaces justice. The vigilante stops asking, "Is this necessary?" and starts telling themselves, "It's always justified." And once that switch flips, morality is no longer the driver. Ego, thrill, and compulsion take over. That's why cases like Varun Suresh are so disturbing. He may have started with a justification. The man was a sex offender, but his own confession, "I did it for fun," exposes something else entirely, a man not driven by justice, but by the thrill of killing. Real-life parallels. Let's compare Suresh to other famous vigilante figures. Pedro Rodrigues Filho, Killer Petey. In Brazil, Rodrigues became notorious for murdering criminals, gangsters, and corrupt officials. He killed more than 70 people, most of them criminals, and became a bizarre folk hero. Some Brazilians even called him a necessary evil. But psychologists noted that Petey often killed with a smile. For him, the act wasn't just about justice. It was also about pleasure. His crusade gave him an identity, a purpose, and even fame. Bernhard Goetz, the subway vigilante. In 1984, Goetz shot 4 men he said were trying to mug him on a New York City subway. Some hailed him as a hero, Others called him a dangerous vigilante. Getz argued self-defense, but the case revealed how quickly public opinion can split when someone bypasses the law. Dexter Morgan, fictional example. Dexter, the TV character, follows a strict code. He only kills other killers. Viewers root for him because he channels his dark urges into what seems like justice. But the show constantly questions whether Dexter is truly moral, or whether he's simply a serial killer with a convenient justification. Varun Suresh doesn't fit neatly into these categories. Unlike Getz, he wasn't acting in the heat of the moment. Unlike Dexter, he didn't follow a code. And unlike Petey, he didn't claim to be saving society. His own words betray him. He admitted he did it for fun. That pushes him out of the vigilante category and into the realm of thrill killers, predators who cloak their violence in the language of justice. The role of control. One of the biggest psychological drives behind vigilantes is control. In a world where people often feel powerless against crime, corruption, and injustice, taking action, even violent action, can give an intoxicating sense of authority. Control becomes addictive. The vigilante feels like they're fixing the world, one act at a time. But control also feeds ego, and ego can become dangerous. When someone starts to believe they decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die, they've essentially crowned themselves judge, jury, and executioner. That's not justice. That's dictatorship on a personal scale. And once that belief takes hold, it can spiral. What starts as one act of justice can become a string of killings, each one easier than the last. Why society sometimes cheers. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Vigilantes often receive public support. Why? Because they target people society already hates. Criminals, rapists, killers, abusers. When someone like Suresh kills a sex offender, there are many who say, "Good, the world is better without him." That emotional reaction is natural. We instinctively want the guilty punished. But cheering vigilantes sets a dangerous precedent. Because if killing is justified whenever the victim is hated, then anyone unpopular becomes fair game. That's why psychologists warn that vigilante justice can be a slippery slope. It satisfies our emotions, but it erodes the rule of law. Vigilantism as identity. Another psychological aspect is how vigilantism can become an identity. For someone like Varun Suresh, picking a sex offender as his victim gave him a role. Not just killer, but avenger. By framing himself as punishing someone hated, he could shield himself from guilt and even seek validation. But then his mask slipped. By admitting it was for fun, he revealed that behind the identity of avenger was the truth of a thrill seeker. Justice or obsession. So was Varun Suresh a vigilante? Or was he a thrill killer? The truth is, he may have been both. He may have chosen his victim to look like a vigilante, but his motives came from thrill, not morality. And that's where psychology draws the line. Justice, an act of protection, rooted in moral outrage. Obsession, a compulsion rooted in thrill and ego. Suresh crossed that line. And once he did, the label of vigilante no longer fits. He became something else. Now that we understand how vigilantes think, the mix of moral outrage, control, and obsession, we need to look at the most chilling element of Suresh's confession, the phrase "for fun," because this doesn't just place him in the world of vigilantes, it places him in the world of thrill killers. People who murder not for money, not for revenge, but purely for the rush. In the next section, we'll explore the disturbing psychology of thrill killing, and why Suresh's words may reveal a darker truth than anyone wants to admit. The 3 words that changed everything. In almost every murder case, investigators ask the same fundamental question. Why? Why did the killer do it? Money? Jealousy? Revenge? Fear? There are common answers. Crimes of passion, crimes of desperation, crimes of greed. But when detectives asked Varun Suresh why he killed a 71-year-old man, a convicted sex offender, no less, his answer was chillingly simple. I did it for fun. Those 3 words changed the entire nature of the case. Because fun is not justice. It's not revenge. It's not even hate. It's pleasure. And when killing becomes pleasurable, we cross into one of the darkest corners of psychology, the world of the thrill killer. What is a thrill killer? Psychologists categorize killers into several motives: financial gain, money, insurance, inheritance, revenge or anger, personal vendettas, power and control, dominance over victims, mission-oriented, killing groups they despise, like cult killers, thrill-seeking. Thrill killers are the rarest and most terrifying category. They kill not because they have to, not because they're cornered, but because the act itself excites them. The violence is the reward. The blood, the fear, the finality of death. These become the sources of stimulation. In other words, they kill for sport, dopamine, and the rush of violence. To understand thrill killers, we need to look at brain chemistry. When humans experience excitement, whether from gambling, extreme sports, or even horror movies, the brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. For some people, normal thrills aren't enough. They crave higher stakes, higher risks. For them, violence itself becomes a drug. Psychologists believe that thrill killers chase that dopamine rush through murder. They aren't motivated by external rewards, money, property, or status. Their reward is the act itself. This may explain Suresh's words. Killing gave him stimulation, satisfaction, fun. Historical examples of thrill killers. To see how chilling this can become, let's look at a few infamous cases. Zodiac killer. In the late 1960s, the Zodiac wrote letters bragging about killing for excitement. He even taunted police, making the chase itself part of the thrill. Ted Bundy. Bundy admitted that part of the murder experience for him was excitement. The build-up, the stalking, the act itself. He called murder an emotional high. Leopold and Loeb. 2 wealthy young men in 1924 murdered a 14-year-old boy, Bobby Franks, not for money or revenge, but to prove they could commit the perfect crime. They said they did it for the thrill of superiority. Charles Starkweather, a teenager who went on a killing spree in the 1950s, describing the murders as exciting and addictive. Each of these killers revealed the same disturbing truth, that for some people, death is entertaining, the mask of morality. But here's where Suresh's case becomes even more complex. Most thrill killers choose random victims. They attack strangers for no reason other than opportunity. But Suresh chose a sex offender. That choice gave him a mask of morality. He could hide his true motive, fun, behind a convenient justification. He could say, "I killed a monster. I did society a favor." This is what makes his confession so revealing. By admitting it was fun, he stripped away the mask. He exposed that morality wasn't the driver. Thrill was. Fun and dehumanization. To call murder fun, a person must first strip away the humanity of the victim. Dehumanization is a psychological process where the killer stops seeing the victim as a person and starts seeing them as an object, a target, a game piece. By labeling the man a sex offender, Suresh could dehumanize him. He wasn't killing an elderly man. He was killing a symbol, a predator, a monster. And in his mind, monsters aren't people. Killing them isn't murder. It's entertainment. This is the twisted psychology of thrill killers. They justify their pleasure by convincing themselves the victim doesn't count. The dangerous escalation. Here's the chilling part. If Suresh truly killed for fun, What happens after the fun fades? One kill might satisfy for a while, but thrill killers often escalate. One isn't enough. The dopamine rush wears off, and the killer seeks another high, another victim, another act of violence. If not stopped, thrill killers often become serial killers. Because once murder becomes entertainment, it's only a matter of time before the craving returns. That's why Suresh's words are so disturbing to law enforcement. They suggest this wasn't about justice at all. It was about pleasure, and if left unchecked, it might not have been his last. The contrast with true vigilantes. Now let's compare again. True vigilantes, in theory, act to protect. They feel driven by moral outrage, even if misguided. They rarely describe their actions as fun, but Suresh's use of that word sets him apart. It places him squarely in the psychological territory of thrill killers, not avengers. Because no matter how despised the victim, if the act itself is pleasurable, the killer isn't delivering justice. He's chasing entertainment. The media's reaction. When news outlets reported on this case, many headlines highlighted the same phrase. He did it for fun. Why? Because it's shocking, it's unusual, it's unsettling, and it forces the public to confront an uncomfortable truth. Some people don't just kill because they're angry. They kill because they enjoy it. That revelation terrifies us. Because how do you prevent that? How do you predict who might decide murder is entertaining? Society's dark fascination. Here's another paradox. As much as society condemns thrill killers, we are also fascinated by them. That's why documentaries about Bundy, Zodiac, and Dahmer get millions of views. That's why fictional shows about killers with codes, like Dexter, become cultural phenomena. Because we are horrified, but also intrigued, by people who kill for fun. Varun Suresh taps directly into that fascination. His words make him not just a vigilante, not just a killer, but a psychological enigma. A man who blurred the line between morality and thrill. What fun really means. So what did Suresh really mean when he said fun? Maybe he meant the adrenaline, the rush of power, the feeling of control. Maybe he meant the satisfaction of punishing someone society hated. But whatever he meant, it reveals a terrifying truth. He enjoyed the act. He wasn't horrified by what he had done. He wasn't burdened with guilt. He was entertained. And that makes him far more dangerous than someone who kills out of anger. Because anger fades. Greed can be satisfied. But pleasure? Pleasure demands to be repeated. So now we arrive at the central dilemma. On one hand, the victim was a sex offender, someone many would call a predator. On the other hand, the killer admitted he did it for fun. That brings us to the heart of the ethical debate. Is vigilante killing ever justified? Does the victim's past erase the killer's crime? And what happens to a society that cheers for justice delivered by thrill killers? In the next section, we'll tackle the ethics of vigilante justice and why Suresh's case forces us to question not just his morality, but our own. The eternal question. Do the ends justify the means? When news broke that Varun Suresh had murdered a convicted sex offender, the internet reacted with a storm of opinions. Some cheered, some recoiled, but almost everyone asked the same haunting question. Was this justice or just another crime? This question has followed vigilante killings throughout history. On one side are those who believe the world is better off without certain people, rapists, abusers, predators. On the other are those who warn that if we allow individuals to play judge, jury, and executioner, we erode the very foundation of law. The case of Suresh puts this debate under a microscope, because it wasn't simply that he killed a sex offender, it was that he admitted he enjoyed it. That single detail flips the conversation from morality to psychology. But the ethical dilemma remains. So let's explore it. Why people sympathize with vigilantes. There's a reason vigilantes capture our imagination. At the core, it's about frustration with the system. We've all seen stories where criminals walk free on technicalities, where abusers serve light sentences, where predators re-offend after release. These failures create a sense of helplessness, a belief that the system cannot protect the vulnerable. In that vacuum, vigilantes appear attractive. They seem to do what the law won't. They punish the untouchables. That's why some people cheered when they heard about Suresh's act. To them, he didn't just kill a man. He delivered the justice the courts never could. But that sympathy is dangerous, because once we excuse killing based on the victim's past, we risk creating a world where emotion replaces law. The slippery slope. Let's play out the logic. If it's okay to kill a sex offender because they're despised, what about a murderer who has already served time? What about a thief? A drug dealer? Someone accused but not convicted? Where does the line stop? The danger of vigilante justice is that the line keeps moving. What starts with predators may end with anyone society dislikes. And in the hands of someone who finds killing fun, that line can vanish entirely. That's why societies establish laws. Not because criminals deserve sympathy, but because law prevents chaos. Without it, anyone could justify murder. And once murder is justified by emotion, no one is safe. Historical lessons. History is filled with examples of vigilante justice spiraling out of control. Lynchings in the American South. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, mobs often executed people without trials, claiming they were punishing criminals. But many of those killed were innocent, targeted out of prejudice. What began as justice became oppression. Mob killings in India. In recent years, mobs in India have beaten and killed suspected rapists, thieves, or child kidnappers. Some victims were guilty, others were not. But once the mob took control, fact no longer mattered. Cartel justice in Mexico. Some communities have supported cartels or vigilante groups that kill thieves or rivals. For a while, they're seen as heroes. But eventually, the violence consumes everyone. These examples show the same pattern. Once vigilante justice is allowed, it expands. It feeds on fear and hate until it swallows the very people it claimed to protect. Law versus emotion. The ethical dilemma here comes down to a clash between two instincts. The emotional instinct, the desire to punish the wicked, the rational principle, the belief that only law can decide guilt and punishment. Emotion says, good riddance. A sex offender is gone. Law says, murder is murder, no matter who the victim is. Both instincts exist in all of us. That's why this debate is so divisive. But philosophers and legal scholars warn, if emotion wins, justice collapses, because emotion is fickle. One day it's aimed at predators. The next, it's aimed at neighbors, rivals, or anyone unpopular. Law exists to protect us from that chaos. The mask of heroism. Vigilantes often wear a mask of heroism. They say they act for others, to protect the vulnerable. But psychology shows that many vigilantes are motivated by ego and thrill. They enjoy being seen as avengers. They enjoy the rush of control. Suresh's confession tore away that mask. By admitting he killed for fun, he revealed that his act wasn't about protection. It wasn't about justice. It was about pleasure. That makes him not a hero, but a killer using morality as camouflage. Public opinion and the hero or monster debate. Cases like this split society. Some still cling to the belief that Suresh did the world a favor. Others insist he's a danger to everyone. This split isn't just about him. It's about us. About how we as a society process crime, morality, and justice. Why do we cheer when Batman breaks bones on screen, but recoil when someone does it in real life? Why do we crave vigilante stories, yet fear vigilantes in our neighborhoods? The answer lies in control. Fictional vigilantes are written to never cross certain lines. Real ones don't have those boundaries. And once someone finds killing fun, there are no guarantees where they'll stop. Ethical theories applied. To sharpen the debate, let's apply a few ethical frameworks. Utilitarianism, greatest good for the greatest number. Some argue killing a sex offender prevents future crimes, benefiting society. But utilitarianism also warns of slippery slopes. Excusing murder may cause more harm long-term. Deontological ethics, duty and rules. From this view, murder is always wrong, no matter the victim. The rule matters more than the outcome. Virtue ethics. Character. What does this act say about the character of the killer? A person who enjoys murder is not virtuous, regardless of who they target. Through each lens, Suresh's act fails. Even if the victim was despised, the motive, fun, undermines any claim to morality. Could vigilante justice ever be justified? Some argue that in extreme cases, vigilante action might be morally defensible. For example, if the system completely fails and immediate action is required to save lives. But Suresh's case wasn't that. The victim was 71 years old, not an imminent threat. There was no evidence he was about to attack someone. This wasn't prevention. This wasn't protection. It was entertainment. That distinction is everything. The dangerous precedent. If society cheers this act, what message does it send? That killing is okay if the victim is hated? That murder is forgivable if it feels good? That's a precedent too dangerous to accept. Because once one person claims that right, others will follow, and then justice becomes nothing more than vengeance dressed as morality. So where does this leave us? We've seen how vigilantes justify themselves. We've seen how thrill killers reveal their true motives. And we've confronted the slippery slope of excusing murder because the victim was despised. But to fully understand the scope of this case, we need to compare it. To place Suresh alongside other vigilantes and killers throughout history, both real and fictional, and see where he fits and where he doesn't. In the next section, we'll explore comparisons and context, from infamous vigilantes to pop culture anti-heroes, and why Suresh's confession makes his case uniquely chilling. Why comparisons matter. Whenever a shocking case like this emerges, society looks for patterns. We ask, have we seen this before? Comparisons help us process the unthinkable. They allow us to place new crimes within a familiar framework. That's why names like Dexter, Batman, or Bernhard gets often surface in conversations about vigilantes. But comparisons also expose contrasts. They reveal not just similarities, but the sharp edges that make one case unique. And in the story of Varun Suresh, it's those contrasts that are most disturbing. Fictional vigilantes versus reality. In fiction, vigilantes are heroes, or at least anti-heroes. Batman is perhaps the most famous. He operates outside the law, hunting criminals in Gotham. He doesn't kill, but he inflicts brutal justice, cheered by audiences worldwide. Dexter Morgan is the darker example, a serial killer who channels his compulsion by killing other killers. Viewers root for him because his victims deserve it. These characters appeal because they offer justice in a world where law seems weak. But their stories are carefully written. They don't kill the innocent. They don't act for fun. Real life isn't scripted. Varun Suresh may have looked like a real-world Dexter, targeting a predator. But his confession ripped away that fantasy. Dexter doesn't say he kills for fun. Batman doesn't smile while breaking bones. Their purpose is framed as protection. Suresh, in contrast, admitted enjoyment. That makes him not a hero, but a killer pretending to be one. Real-life vigilantes. There have been vigilantes before Suresh. Let's compare. Bernhard Goetz, the subway vigilante. In 1984, Goetz shot 4 men he said were trying to mug him on a New York subway. The case divided the city. Some saw him as a hero protecting himself. Others saw him as a racist aggressor who used excessive force. Pedro Rodrigues Filho, Killer Petey. In Brazil, Rodrigues murdered criminals, gangsters, and even corrupt officials. He became infamous for killing those he deemed guilty, sometimes in prison, sometimes on the streets. Some called him a folk hero. Others saw him as just another killer. Charles Bronson's Death Wish influence. In the 1970s, the film Death Wish popularized the image of a man avenging his family by killing criminals. The movie spawned real-life imitators, people who believed they too could be society's avenger. What unites these vigilantes is the perception of justice. Even when the law condemned them, parts of society sympathized because they struck against those viewed as threats. But again, here's the difference. None of them openly admitted to killing for fun. Thrill killers in comparison. To truly understand Suresh's confession, we need to place him not just beside vigilantes, but beside thrill killers. Leopold and Loeb killed a boy in 1924 simply to feel the thrill of superiority. They called it a perfect crime. The Zodiac killer taunted police, writing that killing people was so much fun. Ted Bundy described murder as an emotional high. Suresh's words align more closely with these figures than with vigilantes. His use of fun echoes the language of thrill killers, not avengers. That's why comparisons matter. They show us that Suresh's case doesn't fit the vigilante mold. It fits the thrill killer mold, only disguised by the convenient fact that his victim was hated. Cultural reactions. Why we cheer fiction and fear reality. It's worth asking. Why do we cheer fictional vigilantes but fear real ones? The answer is control. In fiction, the writer controls the line. Batman doesn't kill innocents. Dexter follows a code. They are safe to cheer because their actions are contained by storylines. In reality, there are no such boundaries. Once someone decides they can kill outside the law, nothing guarantees they'll stop at predators. Today it's a sex offender. Tomorrow it could be anyone. That's the ethical and psychological divide. Fiction comforts us with controlled justice. Reality terrifies us with uncontrolled chaos. Public fascination with avenger killers. There's another reason comparisons matter. Society's fascination with so-called avenger killers. When someone kills a hated figure, public opinion often leans towards sympathy. The logic is emotional. At least he killed someone who deserved it. But psychologists warn that this is dangerous thinking, because once society cheers vigilantes, killers learn they can hide behind morality. They realize that targeting hated groups gives them protection. Suresh may have known this. By choosing a sex offender, he picked a victim society wouldn't defend. That choice gave him cover. But his confession of fun stripped away that shield, revealing his true motive. The Dexter effect. Some criminologists talk about the Dexter effect, the way fictional anti-heroes influence real perceptions of vigilante justice. After the TV series Dexter became popular, online forums filled with people discussing how they'd support a real Dexter. Some even speculated about copycat killers inspired by the show. Suresh's case shows the danger of this effect. While he may not have been directly inspired by Dexter, his choice of victim mirrors the show's premise. A criminal, someone despised, chosen as prey. But unlike Dexter, Suresh admitted it was fun, and that single detail collapses the fantasy into horror. Context of age and power. Another contrast worth noting, the victim's age. He was 71 years old, frail, not physically threatening. This was not a battle between equals. This was not someone stopping an imminent attack. This was a younger, stronger man targeting an older man for execution. That fact undermines any claim to self-defense or necessity. It paints the act not as justice, but as predation. The spectrum of vigilantes. When we place vigilantes on a spectrum, here's what it looks like. Self-defense vigilantes gets act in the heat of the moment. Mission vigilantes, PD act repeatedly, targeting criminals. Fictional vigilantes, Batman, Dexter constrained by moral codes. Thrill killers, Bundy, Zodiac, Leopold and Loeb act purely for pleasure. Varun Suresh lands at a disturbing crossroads between these categories. He presented himself as a vigilante, targeting a predator. But his words align him with thrill killers, admitting fun, not justice, as his motive. That makes him uniquely chilling. Why comparisons fail? At the end of the day, every comparison falls short. Because no matter how many cases we examine, Suresh's admission stands apart. Most vigilantes deny pleasure. They frame themselves as protectors. Most thrill killers don't bother with morality. They kill whoever they can. Suresh blended both. He picked a hated victim for cover, but admitted pleasure as motive. That combination, moral mask plus thrill confession, makes him one of the most unsettling figures in recent crime. So where does this leave us? We've compared vigilantes, thrill killers, and fictional anti-heroes. We've seen how Suresh doesn't fit neatly into any category. He's part vigilante, part thrill killer, but fully dangerous. And now we must ask, what happens next? What does this case teach us about human morality, about justice, and about the darkness hidden inside ordinary people? In our final section, we'll look at the aftermath and reflection, the charges, the societal questions, and the chilling lesson of Varun Suresh's fun. The immediate aftermath. When police arrested Varun Suresh, the case was already unusual. A man in his 30s had deliberately targeted a 71-year-old registered sex offender, killed him, and then confessed with chilling detachment. The authorities wasted no time. Suresh was booked on charges of murder. His confession, "I did it for fun," became the defining feature of the case. Prosecutors began preparing for trial, and the legal system moved forward as it always does, carefully, deliberately, and by the book. But outside the courtroom, the debate raged. Was he a hero, or was he a monster? The internet divides. In the days that followed, social media platforms lit up with arguments. On one side, commenters praised Suresh. They said things like, "One less predator in the world. He did what the system never could. Good for him. People like that deserve it." On the other side, critics warned that celebrating his actions was dangerous. If killing is okay because the victim was hated, where does it stop? This isn't justice. This is murder. He admitted he enjoyed it. That makes him no different from any other killer. That division mirrors society's long-standing conflict over vigilante justice. Emotion pulls us one way. Logic pulls us another. The legal path forward. Legally, Suresh's case is straightforward. The act of killing was deliberate. The confession was clear. There is no evidence of self-defense or necessity. By the standards of the law, this is murder. No amount of moral justification changes that. The trial will likely focus not on who did it, but on why. His statement of fun may be used by prosecutors to paint him as a cold-blooded killer. Defense attorneys may try to frame him as a misguided vigilante acting against a predator. But the outcome is almost certain: conviction. The only question is whether the court sees him as a dangerous thrill killer or as a man driven by distorted morality. Lessons from similar cases. Looking back at history, we see that vigilante killers rarely find sympathy in the courtroom. Even when public opinion is divided, the law is clear. Bundy Getz, the subway vigilante, was convicted of illegal gun possession, though acquitted of attempted murder. Pedro Rodrigues Filho, Killer Petey, spent decades in prison. Despite some calling him a hero, the message from the courts is consistent. No matter the victim, no matter the justification, murder is not allowed outside the law. Varun Suresh will likely face the same fate. The psychological takeaway. But the deeper lesson here is psychological, not legal. By admitting that he killed for fun, Suresh pulled back the curtain on one of humanity's darkest impulses. He showed us that sometimes vigilante justice isn't about morality at all. It's about thrill, about power, about the intoxicating rush of taking life into one's own hands. That truth is unsettling because it forces us to confront the thin line between justice and entertainment. The danger of celebrating vigilantes. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time society cheers for vigilantes, we encourage the next one. If killers learn that targeting hated groups earns them applause, they may use that as cover. They may pick victims that guarantee sympathy, while hiding the fact that they're driven by pleasure, not morality. Suresh's case is a warning, because once we start applauding justice by fun, we blur the line between protecting society and destroying it. Reflection. What does this say about us? At the heart of this story isn't just Varun Suresh. It's us. Why do some people cheer his act? Why do others recoil? Why are we fascinated by vigilantes, thrill killers, and the blurred lines between them? Perhaps it's because vigilante stories tap into our own frustrations. We all want a world where predators are punished. We all feel the sting when justice seems weak. But Suresh's words remind us of the danger. If we allow morality to become an excuse for entertainment, if we allow killing to become fun, then justice itself collapses. The human condition. The story of Varun Suresh forces us to face a paradox of the human condition. We crave justice. We despise predators. We secretly cheer when villains fall. But we fear the darkness in ourselves that enjoys it too much. Suresh embodies that paradox. He chose a victim society hated, but his motive stripped away the illusion of heroism. In the end, he wasn't a protector. He wasn't an avenger. He was a man who found entertainment in killing, and that makes him not a hero, but a warning. So what do we take away from this? That justice must remain in the hands of law, no matter how flawed. That morality cannot excuse pleasure in violence. And that thrill killers don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they hide behind masks of righteousness. Varun Suresh's case will fade from headlines in time, but the lesson lingers. When someone claims to fight evil, we must always ask whose justice they serve, society's or their own hunger for thrill. Because once killing becomes fun, justice dies with it. What do you think? Was Varun Suresh a hero who rid the world of a predator? Or a thrill killer who exposed his own darkness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the psychology of true crime, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Because the more we study the darkest corners of the human mind, the better we understand the fine line between justice and evil.